Hello and welcome to Called Bank Sports. The Utah Jazz have done the unexpected, and so have we in actually uploading a podcast. Assuming you're seeing this, so
it's not up yet.
That means rendering and everything went well. But wow, the Jazz are 2-0. They have a 5-way tied, for the best team in the league right now. And I woke up this morning, kind of like really reveling in this, and then I had to remember that. After 2 weeks last season, the best team in the league was the Orlando Magic. So we all kind of saw how that turned out. But Dale, what kind of has stood out to you just looking at these last couple games the Jazz have played? What are your thoughts?
So, well, for starters, I think the narrative around this team, and normally we have more podcasts out, so I can normally point back to my opinions and past, but I never got this one on tape and never published it. But so you're just going to have to trust me that this was my opinion. But I think the narrative around the Jazz was that they weren't as good as they were. And so I'm not saying they're a good team. I'm saying they're a decent team. I think their ceiling, like if everything goes great and then things go bad for other teams, so probably like a 6th seed in the playoffs. I'm not concerned if they don't make the playoffs. But everyone's talking about like how they're going to be the worst team in the league. But you look at their roster, they have some talent. They don't have any stars. Like if you look at the roster build for the Utah Jazz, it's kind of weird, but they're deeper than probably any other team in the NBA. They just don't have stars. They don't have the top level talent. And so you see that with a new coach who's going to go out there and try to prove stuff. You see that with people like Conley and Clarkson who like it in Utah, who can coach up. It's not like they're just a deep young team like the Magic are. They're a deep team with veterans, which you can argue whether that's a good thing or bad thing long term. But you look at that and I see this roster is probably going to hover around the 500 mark. That's kind of my expectation for them. So, but that being said, so far they beat the Nuggets, which wasn't expected. The first game for this head coach, this team, they had training camp together, but most of them haven't played together before. And then they go out and beat the Timberwolves after being down 17. So I think there's a lot of good things you can pull from that, and we can talk about those pieces. But my biggest takeaway so far is I think they hired the right coach.
No, I agree with you on that. And I'm kind of spoiled. I have a friend who has some access to season tickets, and he texted me and said, "Hey, what games do you want to go to?" And I picked those games based on the opposing players I wanted to see, not based on anything that had to do with the Jazz. Which is probably the same in a normal season. But I went to the Denver game and I was talking to them before, and I said, I'm torn because I really do want the Jazz to have a chance at a high pick. 13.4% isn't that high, but to have a shot there. But dang, I do not want to see the Jazz lose to the Denver Nuggets. Not after the bubble, not after Jamal Murray being back, for the first time in a long time. And I went in and I did not have to see the Jazz lose to the Nuggets. And so it definitely is kind of bittersweet in a way where the reason that everyone said the Jazz were going to be such a bad team is because it doesn't make a lot of logical sense, at least to me, to go out and be a 500 team after you just traded away, 2 top 15, 20, 25 players in the league, wherever your opinion lies on that, like it doesn't make a lot of sense. So to watch them win the first 2 games, to win game 1 against the Nuggets, in just a dominating fashion. Like, Denver kind of had, I think they were +8 in the third quarter and got it within single digits in the fourth. But really, those fears of the Jazz giving up that lead were never justified. And last night, down 17 in the first half, I think everyone was thinking, well, I mean, the Jazz are trying to tank.
They've shown their true colors.
Yeah. And then they came out, just continued playing team basketball and were able to win. So it's kind of interesting. I still think there's going to be a fire sale at one point. And these first 2 games are doing a great job of raising the asking price of Vanderbilt and Conley and of Colin Sexton and of JC. Like, they're doing an absolutely amazing job of doing that, because I just have a hard time seeing the Jazz pushing for a play-in spot. That's where I feel like they could be. I have a really hard time where I am putting, Dallas at a 7 or 8 seed, predicting that the Jazz are going to somehow finish better than them. But there is a world in which the Jazz are somehow, the 10 seed, and they have a shot to make the playoffs. I do think we're going to see some trades coming. But if the team stays as is, it's a really good team. It's not a good enough team to make it past the first round in the playoffs, but it's too good of a team to tank.
Yeah, and and tell me if this is crazy, but I think this makes sense. Like going for a 500 team, you have some veterans, you have a good core of a team where, for one thing, if you get a superstar, you can plug them in, and they have a great supporting cast around them, and you're now looking at, depending how good the superstar is, you're not looking to contend. So I think that's one thing with tanking is there's a lot of teams that tank. They don't really have any sort of a core. Then they get their guy in the draft, or sometimes they don't. There's always a risk that you don't. But let's say you do get your guy in the draft, and they leave eventually or force a trade out. You've seen the Pelicans and former Hornets like that happen with Anthony Davis. It kind of happened with Chris Paul, even though Chris Paul had a run in the playoffs one year. And so now you look at them and they built a core. They also did get very lucky in the draft. So I think what Danny Ainge is doing is he wants a core. He's kind of thinking, okay, we want to have a good enough team to flirt with the playoffs at any given year. And then you want to build up draft assets. So what you're doing is he's seeing it not from because other teams, they're tanking. And then you're going for that, 13.5% chance. That's not great odds. And then if you get your guy, you're now on the clock is now ticking where you have to build a core around him. And you don't have any assets to trade. Your only assets are draft picks. And so it's like you're in a tough spot because it's going to be very tough to build a core around this guy. And so I think what he's doing, he's now trying to increase the value of his assets by players on the team so that they're more valuable to trade. And he's trying to collect up draft picks because he knows those have especially far in the distant future, unprotected, those have great trade value. So it's not giving him options where if he has enough draft picks, then he's going to get a high enough pick eventually to get a guy that he wants. Or if the draft isn't deep enough for him, those draft picks have trade value just because there's always a team looking for a guy with potential. So he can trade those and just keep hovering around 500 until the right trade comes or the right guy in the draft comes, and he has the assets to now trade for him. Granted, they're not getting Victor Wembanyama in a trade. They don't have that. They'd have to trade all of their picks and most of their core to trade for him because his trade value is through the roof right now, and he's not even drafted. I don't think
the NBA rules allow you to trade enough money, to be able to get Wembanyama, and I don't even know if the Smiths and all of the ownership group have enough money to trade. I'd be interested to see what the asking price was. I feel like it would have to be at least $500 million. Wembanyama is that sought after of a candidate right now to be the best player in the NBA and to be on the Mount Rushmore or in the top 10. He's got some talent.
But Bill Simmons' take was, he's like, the only 3 definite untouchable guys for Wembanyama are the Nuggets aren't trading Jokic, the Mavs aren't trading Luka, the Bucks aren't trading Giannis, and he said, and the Warriors are going to have a long 2-day conversation without breaks about whether it's worth Steph. And he's like, and they'll eventually decide, no, we need to keep Steph. And he's like, other than that, you're trading anyone for Wembanyama.
No, you really are. I thought that was really interesting. And then you have Scoot Henderson, who is just kind of an interesting prospect there. He's a 6'2" guard with incredible skill, with just great talent. But he's 6'2", which is funny to me. I feel like picks 1 and 2 are both just on complete opposite sides of the spectrum. You have 7'5", and you're like, yeah, he's got a great body, but I am terrified about Wembanyama getting hurt. I am super concerned about him just not being able to withstand the physicality that is. Granted, he's played physical basketball before, but that's scary. Tall players, especially as wiry as he is, are scary. But then you have Scoot Henderson. who's 6'2", and who I really don't want to see as a Jazz fan, just because we just got out of the situation. We had two really short guards in the back. And I love Mike and Donovan to death, but I really think that basketball is going towards, like the 6'8", 6'9" guys. Trying to basically just have as many Paul Georges and Kawhi Leonards as you can have on the court and deal with, the occasional height disadvantage of a center. So I definitely am intrigued to see what happens with them come the draft next year. Like you said, right now, unless it looks like the Jazz are trying to stay around a 5, which is rough because if the Jazz ever want to trade for a superstar, they're going to have to get rid of like Vanderbilt, and they're going to have to get rid of Mark. They're not going to just be able to trade the bottom third of their bench to get a superstar to add to it. The Jazz probably aren't going to get a superstar via free agency anytime soon. Now, the new CBA is coming up. Someone could want a lot of money to the point where the Jazz are the only team offering them the max contract. And all of a sudden, they end up in Salt Lake City to the surprise of everyone. But who's the best free agent the Jazz have got and are living them? And while there might be some recency bias here, I think it's Bojan Bogdanovic. Is there anyone that comes to mind for you?
No big names. And I'm blanking on the name. I feel like there was one that kind of similar to Bojan. He was kind of a big, exciting name, and then he just didn't live up to expectations. Which you could argue that was for Bojan had some great moments, but I feel like he wasn't as good as we hoped he would be.
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard, like, how much differently do we think of Bojan? I was listening to the Old Man and the Three with JJ Redick. He did a Donovan Mitchell interview that he released yesterday. And listening to Donovan talk about the bubble was just painful. Kept bringing up the 8-second violation in game 1. I'm just like, dang, like, that's something that sounds like it keeps them up at night. Like, if the Jazz don't go down 0-1 and they're able to win that first game, what would have happened? If Bojan wasn't out for the season with a hand injury that he had surgery on, like, what does happen there? But overall, like, yeah, the Jazz aren't a free agent destination. They're not going to get any amazing trades. Like, Clarkson was a great trade, but that was lucky. And like getting the best 6th or 7th guy, you can do via a trade, and you can keep things working out. But that's not going to happen. So the draft is how the Jazz built. And you are right. Like, Boston built up to, a respectable team, not a title contender, but respectable, and then just got really lucky with the Nets picks. And so
that's never going to happen again.
No,
teams have learned from that. Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe, I mean, like, yeah, we have this cataclysmic event that's going to happen in the next couple of years with the new CBA. That's going to throw contracts out of whack. You're going to see people who deserve a 5-year maximum with a player option, who deserve to make a lot of money, sign 1-year deals with player options with the hope of being able to sign under the new salary cap. And to just, the fact that Donovan and Rudy this year are like, or Donovan's like $25 million this year, and that's going to be a role player salary 3 years from now, is just going to shake the NBA to its core. And so maybe it is the right move to wait and try to profit from that chaos, to have a mediocre team, and then all of a sudden just have a lot more money you can spend, and to be able to pick up on other people's, or just maybe not even mistakes, but just profit from the chaos.
Yeah, and yeah, it's going to be weird. We've seen something similar to that when Kevin Durant went to the Warriors, but yeah, I like this one is going to be big, where it's like you're used to anyone being paid more than $20 million a year is like at least in the conversation for All-Star, or it's a bad contract. But now it's going to be, oh, the 8th guy on your bench is getting paid $22 million a year, and it's going to be weird. And the Jazz right now, they have a lot of reasonable contracts, a lot of very tradable contracts, and so they're with a lot of talent that they can build up. So I think what Danny Ainge is doing, I think he knows the draft is unpredictable. He never knows when there's going to be an all-star up that he wants to trade for, and he knows the CBA is coming. So I think the move that they're going for is, hey, let's have a core. but let's give ourselves as many options as we want. And so he has lots
Whether
of draft
this
picks. He has lots of tradable assets, and most of them are becoming more valuable. You do have a few, like Clarkson's probably at his peak right now, trade value. Conley, Olenek are probably going down, but they kind of make everyone else look good.
And I do think, since I've heard this take before, and it would be crazy for it to happen, I do think it could happen, that Colin Sexton has the same ceiling as Donovan Mitchell. That that the reason that Colin Sexton has not done as well as Donovan Mitchell is because Cleveland has been a terrible situation to be his whole career. You have the tanking, you have the fact that when he starts coming into his own, he gets injured and missed the whole season. And for whatever reason, like, he got a lot of disrespect, trying to get his contract and stuff. So coming to Utah, coming to a much more stable situation than most of his time in Cleveland, which is crazy to say, having a coach in Will Hardy who's really good at his job. Maybe 3 years from now, it looks like the Jazz just fleeced Cleveland, because you have a player who's is playing at the same level as Donovan Mitchell, and you got three draft picks plus some swaps to take him. And I definitely wouldn't bet on it, but I wouldn't be entirely shocked to see that future come to fruition.
And I think it's definitely possible. One thing that I noticed with the Jazz playing, and this may seem like I'm changing the topic. I'm going to come back around to this.
Okay.
But
let's hear it.
But one thing that I noticed with the Jazz playing basketball these first two games is I feel like the ball movement that we all wanted the last couple of years is here now. The players, like, because you saw the year, like the first maybe 20 games of the season where the year the Jazz were the number one seed, they moved the ball excellently. There were some amazing passes. I think it was a lot of fun to watch. And I kind of started to lose it. I don't know whether that was injuries, whether that was locker room things. Them just getting lazy. Donovan Mitchell them deciding it's easier to just give him the ball and back off. Yeah. I don't know what that was, but we're seeing some really good ball movement, and that's what's making this team be able to win these games against good teams, even though they don't have the roster talent. Is they're moving the ball, they're unselfish. You're going to see probably, I probably, unless Markkanen just takes a huge step up or Sexton starts getting a lot more minutes, I'm not really expecting anyone to average more than 20 points a game on this team. But you're going to see 5 to 6 people in the teens for averaging points, just because they're moving the ball, everyone's getting their touches. One game someone goes up, and so there's a lot of people who can score. And so one thing that may make this Cleveland thing, and this is one case, a lot of people see players as stagnant, so we'll see how Donovan Mitchell develops and adjusts to Cleveland. But Donovan Mitchell, he's not the greatest distributor. He doesn't move the ball well. It's not uncommon for the ball to come to him, and he just kind of runs the rest of the possession and isolation, which he's really good at. He's excellent at that. Yeah. But that's one sign where it's like, if you have too many players like that, and a lot of people are saying Garland might be kind of like that too, even though I think his assist numbers were much better than Mitchell's last year. But if you're having too many players where it's just tough to move the ball as a team, and too many players where it's kind of a black hole when the ball gets passed to them, the Cleveland Cavaliers, even with all that talent, may not be as good. So we'll see how that goes. I think Donovan Mitchell is open and ready to adjust, but we saw that when Quinn Snyder changed the system, and he was open and ready to adjust, and then the team just kind of fell back into old habits, and they kept shooting a lot of threes, but they weren't moving the ball like they needed to, and that kind of hurt them. And that's where you saw last season they weren't doing that at all that season, and there were so many games that they just dropped because of those either silly turnovers or not moving the ball right or things like that.
It was really interesting with the Donovan Mitchell JJ Redick interview, and just Gobert being asked a bunch of questions about Utah with the T-Wolves game last night. To just kind of hear how they both wanted to run it back, and they both felt like last season wasn't. To look at that and say, how important is it for these players to get changes of scenery? Like, I think that's something really important for the human condition, that you can kind of reach a point where you're stagnant where you're at. And it is frustrating, when these players are making $1 million a year, at least I am probably putting too much emotional investment into how well those teams perform to not think that they're always going out and trying their best. But I know how much when I get a new opportunity, how that gives me opportunity, how that makes it a lot easier for me to grow. That I do think that we're going to see Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert both take steps in Minnesota and Cleveland that might frustrate us as Jazz fans, but make a lot of sense to me just based on the fact that they put in a new situation that allowed them to just have a better opportunity than being where they've, been for the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I think we'll definitely see a boost from them this year, and maybe not even a boost, but a change that they'll adjust. One thing that I think though is same thing. Like once you get a new position, once you get a little comfortable, you're still going through the motions. You're still working hard. You're putting in the hours, but maybe you start to coast a little bit, and it's just natural that once you get a little bit comfortable, your brain just starts to go on autopilot, and that happens with all of us, and I think that happens with NBA players all the time, and that's why you see like the really great players. You're looking at Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, all of them. You see them, and maybe there were moments where that happened, but you saw all of them force themselves and push themselves and keep themselves out of the comfort zone.
Yeah,
and that's why they were as great as they were.
Yeah, you missed a name on that list. And I think that's
Jeremy
why
Lin
Giannis is so amazing.
Oh, he's a good player too. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's why Giannis is so amazing, and that's really who you want to draft. You want to draft someone like him who has that drive. And I just don't foresee a future where I feel like, Giannis needs a change of scenery and I honestly wonder how much of that, is his background and his childhood, in Greece. That was just absolutely terrible that I don't want anyone to have to go through. But looking at how much it seemingly does for him as a player, where he just always gives it his all and is just always playing like his life depends on it, is something that if the Jazz were able to find a player with that mentality, I struggle seeing a world where the Jazz win a title without drafting a player like that, just based on the fact that it's really hard to find people, NBA players who their change of scenery. And that's just the small market conundrum. It's not just here. It's other places too. So I'm intrigued to see where the next decade of Jazz basketball goes. It's definitely been exciting these first 2 games, and I'm worried the season's going to become a slog at some point, but maybe not. Maybe it will continue to be this exciting throughout the.
Yeah, and we'll see. I think even if they start getting some long losing streaks, which are never fun, even when you expect your team not to be great. The nice thing about this situation is there's a few key players that you can always look for little bright things from. You can see, Sexton, even though we lost the last 6 games, seeing those passes a little bit better, or this little. And so when we have a young team, you're looking for that development. With the Jazz, I think we saw little glimmers of young talent. We didn't talk about Butler being waived, but that made me upset. I really liked him. I thought he would. I thought if he had the opportunities, I thought he would turn into a Jalen Brunson, maybe not style, but similar trajectory.
I'm interested. Yeah, no, I'm interested to see what happens with him. I wish him the best. Part of me wonders if the medicals just became too big of a concern, or if it. They just looked at it and said, who has the most upside? I think a lot of people expected Doak to be cut. I am interested to see how that goes. I root for him. I understand there's a lot of frustration. I understand that there's maybe 1 or 2 players the Jazz could have drafted instead of him. That it would be interesting to see what happened. But I also do see the reasoning behind trying to help out Rudy, and do still support the front office. So it'll be exciting. It'll be exciting to see who does well. It's been fun to watch, Markkanen. It's been fun to watch. Who's the new center?
Lennox, Vanderbilt, Kessler.
No, the Kessler. Thank you, Walker Kessler. It's been fun to watch him. I just think this is going to be a fun year, and I just have to divorce myself from any expectations since if I expect the Jazz, to go 10-72 when they don't, that's going to be obnoxious. If I expect them to go, 40-42, that's also going to be obnoxious. So I'm just going to try to enjoy the good games when they come and shrug off the bad ones. And
which is
it's
really
gonna be like that for a couple.
It's kind of refreshing, at least for this season. Hopefully it doesn't last too long, because last year was so stressful as a Jazz fan, where it's like, we know we're a good team, we know we can play better, and it just wasn't happening. And I think you saw that on the players too, where this year they don't feel that weight and they're playing really free basketball right now. We'll see how that develops over the season.
And I think that had the Jazz just got Will Hardy, that changed just from the beginning, and knowing he's really good at his job, even though he hasn't been doing it that long, that maybe that change would have allowed the Jazz, to see a resurgence, to get home court. But the NBA is just so competitive right now. And I expect it to stay competitive, but I can see where you're like, okay, we're fighting against 12, 13 other teams for a title right now. We're not in the top 4 of that. So let's try to open up our window a bit later, see how things are going in like 26, 27, which is really hard as a fan, but very understandable business perspective.
Yeah, and one thing I want to bring up real quick before we wrap this episode up is I'm curious. A lot of time, because we talked about maybe Danny Ainge isn't planning to tank at all. He's okay winning games. I'm curious if that's not the case, and they're saying, hey, it's the first 2 games. This is kind of a weird group. Let's give our coach some confidence. Say, hey, go do your thing. Win some games, and he went out and won some games. I wonder though if and you see the lineups that he's playing, he's giving the veterans a lot of minutes.
He is.
I want, and which that's how you win games. I wonder if there's ever going to be some pressure from either Ainge or Zanuck or someone who makes sure Hardy keeps his job to start giving the younger guys minutes and being okay losing games. So. I wonder if right now they're just saying, hey, go do your thing, go show that you earned this job, win the game. But now, okay, we're 6-2. Okay, we don't want to be this good.
Yeah.
we know you're good. Give Sexton more minutes. Give Kessler more minutes. Like, give the young guys more minutes. We want to see what's that Italian player that we signed?
Fontecchio.
Yeah, we want to see him play. See if he's any good. Give our rookie Agbaji. Let's see what he can do. I wonder if there's going to be some pressure to give them more minutes, or if they're saying, "Hey, this is your team. Go win some basketball games, and we'll get you a better roster, depending on what happens."
It'll be interesting to see. So, I'm excited for this year, and I shouldn't let 2 games forecast the next 80.
Oh, we do that all the time, though.
How else do you get content? So. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We are doing a 500 subscriber giveaway, and that would make this opening weekend even better than it's already been. But again, thank you for watching, and go Jazz!